Salute e salve and welcome to a new episode of Storia d'Italia Extra. Yes, this episode is in English. I will be interviewing the great Bry from Pontifacts, one of my favorite podcasts. I have already interviewed Bry ages ago about the Byzantine papacy, and I felt it was only proper and just to do the same now that we have entered a new period of papal history, the Carolingian papacy. In this episode, you will find several hints of things to come, so that it will be a good intro to the new couple of centuries that are in front of us. On top, I will be briefly reviewing with Bry another period of papal history, the one where her podcast is currently in, and that fascinates me to no end, the Gregorian reform period of the 11th century, about which I talked briefly in the latest book, Quando Venezia distrusse l'impero romano. I hope you enjoy the interview. I leave it to it. Salute e salve, welcome back to an episode in English on my podcast. Actually, in English, my host. Me, a bit Italian with English with an strong Italian accent. Thank you so much, Bry, for coming back on the podcast. If you are not listening to Pontifacts, I don't know what you're doing here. Just go listen to Pontifacts absolutely right now. Just kidding. You can finish the episode, but just go listen to it. It's a great podcast. Bry and Fry are the co-host. They go through the entire history of the papacy with a very interesting format. Maybe we can talk about that. But Bry, first of all, thank you for being here.
Well, grazie. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all of the kind words about our podcast. I'm happy to be back.
As you know, I am a fan. So every time the episode comes out, maybe a couple of days if I don't have a long walk to do. But I always listen. I'm always, updated, up to date. And it's a
very
great...
long now.
They're very long and they're not going to get shorter because you just hit, let's say you just hit the 11th century is where the papacy starts to be like a word moving thing. I mean, it was important before, but now it's really something else. But just to remind my listeners, how is your podcast structured, the format, where you started, where you are?
Perfect. Okay, so Pontifacts is a papal history podcast ranking all of the popes from Peter to Leo the 14th, a motto we have recently updated.
Yeah. It pains me. It pains me to hear. I mean, nothing against Leo the 14th, but I was just used to, Peter to Francis.
Peter
also
to Francis
has a ring to it, without the numbers. It's going to Leo the 14th. Okay, but yes,
I know. We have to stay modern.
Yeah.
So in each episode, we focus on the life of a single pope and we review their papacy within the broader world history. And then we rate them based on a series of subjective categories. Some of them are serious, like what impact their papacy had on prestige and power of the papacy and the church. And some are very silly, like what their face looked like.
One of my favorite pieces, if I can say, it's I always look forward to it.
Oh, that's good because it is sort of a challenge to convey what you are looking at into an audio format.
Yeah, you are saying, you don't say. I've done a couple of episodes about art. So the art of it was indeed like a challenge. We were talking about these things and it's very interesting, but talking and seeing are not exactly the same thing. But it is also, it is very beautiful sometimes to hear you girls talk about these men, these old men, usually not all old, but most of them old men. And and you describe them in a very interesting way, comparing to an actor or someone, and then I create in my head an image, and then I go check the image of the actual image. Very often it's very close to how you described it. You do a good job there. So
good.
so it's a great format to compare the papers, all the papacies in ways serious and a little bit more spontaneous. And you have been doing this now for how many popes you covered?
Well, at time of recording, we have covered all of the popes and anti-popes from Peter, who died in 64 AD, to Pope Gregory VII, who died in 1085, which means we have covered over 1,000 years of papal history and followed the popes through the Roman Empire, the Ostrogothic papacy, the Byzantine papacy, the Frankish papacy, the Seculum Obscurum, also known as the Pornocracy, the Attonian papacy, and now we are in what is considered the High Middle Ages and the Crusader era.
Yeah, interesting, exciting stuff. Already coming up with Leo IX, so someone with the same name of the current pope. And Gregory VII. I mean, also the others in the between, but these two very, very big papacies. And talking about this period, before we go to the topic of today, which is the Frankish papacy, I don't want to forget about it, but it's so interesting that you are in this period, which I'm also very interested into. I covered it a bit in my last book because it was the Fourth Crusade, so I had to give a bit of context to my listeners that are not used to the High Middle Ages because I didn't get there. So I gave a little bit of context, but I hit, let's say, a little bit of a pet theory, which you can demolish if you want. There's no problem for me. That the movement of reform you're covering now in the 11th century is really a big change in the history of the church, to the point that I will almost say that Catholicism, the current form of the mainstream, let's say, the Roman part of Western Christianity, really dates from the 11th century. And what was before was a sort of a mixture of Western and Eastern Christianity, an imperial Roman church which evolved through the High Middle Ages, but didn't cut the cord with antiquity. Whereas the 11th century, I see something really big changing. Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to disagree, no problem.
No, I agree with you. I think this is a very foundational moment for the Catholic Church. I will say that in terms of the actual theology, the religion itself and what they believe, not much is changing in that period. However, what we call Catholicism, in sense of the church structure, the hierarchy, the ceremony, the power, the impact, the interaction with other places and other powers and other religions. So everything else that we call Catholicism, especially about the role of the Pope, absolutely that is true. And more than anyone else, we do have Gregory VII to thank for that, because it is his aggressive and unwavering belief that the Pope must be the unquestioned central authority of the church as like God's representative on earth and as an authority over other rulers in the temporal world is what makes Catholicism what it is for the rest of history.
Yeah.
Ironically, we can also say that that idea started in what we're going to be talking today in the Frankish papacy, but it doesn't really find its footing until Gregory and the High Middle Ages.
Yeah, the bricks were there, but then in the 11th century, 12th century, they really built on those foundations. They built something significantly innovative in that sense, not in theological sense. As you said, theology was mostly dealt with in the ecumenical councils of the between the 4th and the 8th century.
Yes.
As a preview to our listeners, because we said it, that it's very important, but can you say, what novelties? Okay, one we already talked about, so the importance of the church above temporal rulers, but what other innovations you have already covered in the last popes that you have covered?
Well, the period that we're currently in is known mostly for its reforms. It's known as both the German Reform period and the Gregorian Reform because it begins with Leo and it finds its heart with Gregory. And in the reforms, we have two major focuses in the reform, which is cracking down on simony and lay investiture and also clerical marriage. So simony being the selling and buying of church offices and churches themselves, and lay investiture being any layman investing a church office. So, for example, a king or an emperor appointing a bishop rather than that coming from the church.
Yeah, which was totally common before during the Frank.
Widespread.
Yeah, very widespread. Yeah.
Yes. And with clerical marriage, this was completely uncanonical within the Western churches. So they moved to force clerics to put aside their wives and enforced the ideas of celibacy and being unmarried. Both of these abuses, simony and clerical marriage, were extremely widespread throughout the churches in Europe at this time, to the point where these popes were often met with violent resistance to their reform efforts. But because these men who they were, that only encouraged them to push harder. And we really see that become a massive focus of this time. And then the other major feature of this period is the actual tangible power of the Pope, as we said. These popes, in particular, fight hard to enshrine this idea of papal primacy, and that being the successor of Peter made them the absolute and undeniable head of the church, and they claw back their independence from ruling kings and emperors, and they separate themselves from the control of the nobles in Rome, which we have seen up until this point think of the papacy as their own means of maintaining control of the city for quite some time. Yeah.
That's the story of the Secundum Obscurum, just to do a spoiler for my listeners. But coming. So the one in between the two periods we're talking today, where in reality two families basically ruled the papacy, and they treated it as their personal property. And we have, at the beginning of the 11th century, this is what really surprises me, that the church reaches its lowest of lows just a few years before Leo IX. So this is, in a way, it's incredible how they managed to spin it around from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs in a matter of a few decades. And it's clear that there is a movement behind. I don't know how much they create it or they react to it, but it seems they also create it, because there is a real popular movement behind. You talked about popular movements in Milan and in other regions. So it's clearly something that is not just a couple of people thinking we should have these powers, but it is backed up by authority.
And I think that really belongs to Leo IX in globalizing the papacy, because he was this pope who, for the first time in history, traveled around and let people see who he was and saw his zeal. So he specifically went around all of Europe and inspired people to have this movement. And then he surrounded himself with the people who bought into the movement and were very strong reformers. So they give this very global feeling, which did not exist before.
Yeah, it's very interesting this period, and move on. But I've read, authors, historians that talk about the revolution as a revolutionary period, in giving that sense of it's not it's something big. It's a big change, and it's a big change which is impacting everyone in a certain way. So
Absolutely.
exciting stuff, but we have to go back. You see,
Yes.
I couldn't make it. I had you here. I had to talk about this. So, but
course.
but the matter at hand is the Frankish papacy, where we will see some of these building blocks now being built for the for the future. The Frankish papacy, I have defined it to you from Stephen II. I covered him in the podcast, so how important it is, the world-changing idea of going to the Franks, going to Pippin and asking his aid. So how that is important. You can claim that it goes even before him, all the way to, I defined it with you, all the way to the Cadaver Synod. So just to cover... basically, and I said, okay, maybe not there, so we're not going to talk about it because it's too cool. Maybe we will do another episode. We'll see in a few years. But let's say this period is defined by the relationship between the papacy and the Franks. What else do you think defines, let's say, this period from the mid of the 8th century to the mid of the 9th century?
I think there are two things that really come to the forefront for the papacy at this time and through this relationship. And the first one is, I think, perhaps the most major and that is the idea of temporal influence. This is the first time that the popes and the church start having power beyond the church and beyond the city of Rome. This is the first time that the pope has essentially a kingdom to rule and a territory. And this completely changes what the Pope is able to do and makes them a significant figure in things like political negotiations and the power dynamics of Italy. And then in Europe as a whole, this is where we see the Pope get an army. This is where we see the Pope actually being active in the defense of Rome, in the defense of Italy, and having the powers of a king. It's not just about the spiritual presence anymore. However, the other major idea out of this is the idea of moral authority and spiritual authority, because in this alliance that the popes forge with the Frankish rulers, we see the idea that the pope's support is a legitimizing factor for something that a ruler wants to do. This is most clearly seen in the formation of the idea of the Holy Roman Empire, with the Pope being the only person who can crown a Holy Roman Emperor. And when a Pope has crowned a Holy Roman Emperor, this makes the actions and the ambitions of that emperor legitimate and good and holy and backed by God. This starts with Pepin, utilizing the Pope's support as justification to overtake and overhaul and do away with a traditionally accepted model for kingship in Francia and turn it into something that becomes a powerful expansionist dynasty. So those are my two major themes.
And they're pretty major because
major.
It's hard to remember today that the papacy, in a way, during the Byzantine papacy, in a sort of way, was more similar to the one of today. So more confined to the realm of religion, morality, of course, not only, but mostly, and working inside the structure of the empire. So in that sense, it wasn't that different, the papacy during that time, from the ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople. Of course, the ecumenical patriarch...
They would say otherwise.
They will say otherwise.
But it's true.
Yeah. And I mean, the ecumenical patriarch didn't have that distance from the emperor, that gives up, makes him a bit more comfortable, the Pope, in Rome in the 7th century. But a Pope in the 7th century, as we said in the previous episode, can be kidnapped and brought to Rome and judged and sent to Crimea. That is unthinkable now in this new Frankish papacy, no? Very, very interesting. Now, of course, your job is to rank popes, right? That's the job description. So I need to add, I know you already did it. So you already ranked with Fry all the popes, in this period. But is there, let me say, which one won of all those popes? And today, knowing also other popes that comes after, having a few more years of experience, do you stand by that or not?
So the highest scorers within the Frankish papacy are Nicholas I with a score of 45.75.
The deluxe, how is it called?
Yes, the deluxe,
the
not
deluxe,
the
not
great.
the great, the deluxe.
We have Adrian I with a score of 44, and Leo III with a score of 43.375. So within total, these three men are separated by less than 2.5 points. And I think that they're a perfect representation for the high points of this period. So while they may not stand up as strongly in reflection to what comes next, although I will say Nicholas is still within the top 10, I do stand by these three coming out on top of this era for a number of reasons, and I can give you a couple reasons for each of these popes. So we'll go in the order that they come. So Adrian I is the pope that forges the most impactful relationship with Charlemagne, who is the man of the day. And this results in, for Rome, both the end of the Lombard rule and threat, which is extremely important for the Pope, and the cementing of the territory of the Papal States, which is that kingdom that we referenced. It secures the Franks as the protectors of the Pope, and the utmost respect that Charlemagne has for Pope Adrian I is what truly allows the Frankish papacy and all the power that this affords the papacy to happen.
Yeah,
and despite their...
Yeah, and when he dies, Charlemagne writes, has this wonderful epitaph written for Adrian. There's clearly a relationship here, like that he looked at him a bit like an equal. I don't think he looked at Leo as an equal. This is my opinion. But I think he looked at Adrian as an equal.
I agree. I think that these two men saw themselves as equals and as partners, and the mutual respect that they have with one another is massively significant. That does not mean that they didn't disagree, and often they butted heads about where they fit in terms of relationship to one another. But without Adrian and the force and the respect Charlemagne had for him, and the fact that he didn't allow Charlemagne to walk all over him, is what makes the Frankish papacy established the way that it is. Otherwise, this very easily could have become Byzantine papacy Mark II.
Yeah, like Charlemagne reaches, gets to Rome in 773, 774, finds someone that he thinks is beneath him, that he can boss around, and then, he's like, okay, yes, you are an important bishop of my kingdom, basically.
Exactly. And I think that is what he sees with Leo III. However, I do want to give Leo III some credit here, too, because this pope not only survives a brutal attack and mutilation, but he is involved, as a result of that attack, in a massively significant council that results in the determination that no power on earth could judge the Pope but the Pope himself. And that alone, that statement, is so significant that the Church will hold on to it to this day. He is also the Pope that crowns Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor, beginning this whole ideology. So with one single act, Leo revives the concept of the empire in the West and places Charlemagne at its head, anointed by God's representative on earth, which is that other precedent of the Pope having the exclusive right to bestow an imperial crown.
Yeah. This is using basically the donation of Constantine to that effect, saying, okay, I am in a way I have this power, and I have the power to bestow this the imperial rule. I cannot rule as an emperor, obviously, but the source of that, it's me.
And Nicholas III, as our top scorer of this round, now takes those ideas that were set by Adrian and Leo and becomes a force of nature with them. He is the one who truly enforces these ideas. And he's enforcing them at a time where Charlemagne is gone, and we're starting to see what the legacy of those relationships is going to be. And he expands it to the rest of the church. He makes massive steps for papal primacy. He stands up to everyone, everywhere. He's the first pope to use an excommunication to draw a line in the sand about who is in charge with the Archbishop of Ravenna. He also fights for the separation of temporal and ecclesiastical authority to keep the emperors from overstepping. And he also is really standing up for that idea of, I am the moral and spiritual authority. And that means if a king does not conduct himself morally and in an orthodox fashion, then the Pope may invalidate their legitimacy. So it starts to sound like Leo IX and Gregory VII.
And Gregory VII, right? As you said, the building blocks are here.
Yes.
Let's say it will be lost later after Nicholas. It will be, but the ideology is there to be picked up by better men. Let's say.
Exactly.
So now I have to force you to pick between these three dudes.
Ooh. I have to give it to Nicholas, because I still feel like in our ratings, as this is a little bit of spoilers for our episodes, but Fry was not as convinced by this man as I am, and I feel like he probably deserves the title of the Great. He stands up and excommunicates an emperor for doing something that is morally not correct, and that, at this point, no one would have dared to do something like that. Until Gregory. No one would have dared. So he stands out as a force of nature in this time.
Yeah. He wasn't lucky with his successors. Let's put it this way. So, because sometimes if you build something and then you are succeeded by people that continue to your work, then you shine even more. But then, after Nicholas, things don't go so well. So, it gets really. But talking about, we have a few anti-popes also in this period, and you do cover the anti-popes for your Patreon. So no spoiler there. It's, sustain Pontifacts in order to listen to the anti-popes. But is there an anti-pope in this period that shines for you? And in general, I wanted to ask you also which one is your favorite anti-pope in all the history you have covered, or that you will cover, if you want to say it. You don't. Spoilers alert for anti-popes from on Patreon.
Well, I can say this in one answer because they are the same. I think that my favorite anti-pope from this time period is, as far as I know, probably going to be my favorite anti-pope in history. And of course, that could be none other than Anastasius Bibliothecarius.
Yes. Tell the story.
He is such an interesting person because he is somebody who existed within the church in a very significant way. He was the papal librarian. He was a massively important figure doing massively important work for the papacy. And then through a series of having influential family members as well, not only is he excommunicated from the church for disloyalty, he then becomes an anti-pope twice, and he is a very aggressive anti-pope, including physically attacking Pope Benedict III during his anti-papacy. And then he might have had a hand in murdering a pope's family. in Adrian II in the murder of both his wife and daughter. So I think he is by far the most dramatic anti-pope that we will have in terms of being a problem personally. We will certainly see anti-popes that present violent struggle and will cast popes out of Rome and will have armies at their back. But in terms of this being a period where it is essentially a man and his family causing such an incredible obstacle to the popes, and then potentially being responsible for the murder of a pope's entire family, is bizarre.
That's an interesting story right there. And you're right, there'll be others that, maybe they cast a bigger shadow politically, but this is a very interesting story. And already the title Bibliothecarius, so the librarian is fantastic. That's enough.
It just goes to show how incredibly important he was, that he got to hang on to this title as being significant in the church, even though he was, at points, the greatest enemy the church had.
Talking of enemies and things not going very well. So we've talked about the good popes. What about the bad popes? Which one are the worst ranked from the period in Pontifacts? And same question, do you stand by it?
Well, and this one I have a slightly different answer, because our lowest scoring popes of the period are Pope Valentine with a score of 4.5625 and Pope Boniface VI with a score of 6.5625. Those long numbers at the end kind of give away why they are the lowest scoring, which is
very short,
because they don't last very long.
Yeah.
And so I don't think this is necessarily reflective of the worst, because Valentine was pope for only 40 days, and Boniface VI was only pope for 15 days. So they don't really get represented in being the worst because they didn't have a chance to be good or bad. Within the period you described, there can be only one answer for who is the worst pope, and that is Pope Stephen VI. And here is the sizzle or preview if you are not familiar. This is a man who dug up the body of a previous pope, put that dead body on trial, all in an attempt to re-legitimize himself,
basically, because he needed basically the acts of the previous pope condemned, basically.
And he accused the cadaver of that pope of being guilty of the same thing that he was himself guilty of. And this begins a period of popes consistently invalidating and undoing the work of previous popes that will go on for almost 100 years. He single-handedly destroys the prestige and the idea that the papacy is a moral or spiritual guider or leader or authority, and he undoes all of the faith and loyalty that anyone has in the popes at this time.
Yeah,
it's not good.
It's not good. And I will say this is very important for an institution which claims to be always right, and being consistently right. And in a way, the Church of Rome could always say we never were. We were always on the right side of orthodoxy. We were always so up to this point. Popes didn't contradict each other on purpose, because that kind of gives away the whole concept of being an institution which is always right and which is basically maintaining the purity of the faith. And then you come at this point, and you're right. He basically destroys it with one hit, and it never it doesn't recover for a very long time. So it's clear.
It is still brought up when we have discussions about the idea of papal infallibility. And I will say, to clarify, papal infallibility is not
only
as long-standing.
No?
Yeah, and it's not as long-standing in the church as most people think. That is an idea that actually comes out of the 1800s, so quite a way forward. However, when we hear the word infallibility, this is what people come back to and go, well, what about this? And it's this moment that we keep looking at as delegitimizing the church in history, even now.
Yeah, and in fact, it's one of the favorite episodes from the Protestants during the
Oh,
Reformation,
yes.
to point out you were saying
Hmm.
it's a very low. Let's put it this way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so now I would like to change the topic to more geopolitics. Okay, first of all, a little a little note. A lot of my listeners, not all, I have fields of supporters. So some support the Byzantines, some support the papacy, but there is a good chunk of my listeners from, I'm living the 8th century, so obviously for them it's very fresh, that support the Lombards, no? So and I know the Lombards
Yes.
are not very popular in Pontifacts.
And understandably so.
And understandably so, the enemy of the papacy. And it's also extremely funny how you always say, Fry, can you guess what is it? Which problem is it right now? And she never. It's the Lombards. It's always
It's
the Lombards.
always the Lombards at this point.
So I have one of these uchronic questions, no? Like alternative history. Was it ever possible? Let's put it this way: during the 8th century, especially where the Lombards are strong, their strongest, for the Lombard kingdom to conquer Rome and hold it. Because conquer Rome, probably yes, but conquer
Yes,
Rome and
yeah.
hold it.
I think yes, they could have absolutely at some point come in and conquer Rome. Holding it is the challenge. However, the only thing that would have been coming against them at this point, because we know in the 8th century we can expect absolutely nothing of the Byzantines for support.
Yeah.
They have left the papacy out to the wolves, literally. And we can call the wolves the Lombards, or we can call the wolves the nobles in Rome. And we know that they are hungry and thirsting for it. So I think the greatest obstacle the Lombards would have had are the nobles of Rome, or at least the nobles surrounding Rome. I don't know at this time whether that would have been enough to drive them off. So it's entirely possible that they could have held Rome for a time. However, I think it would have gone much the way of the Ostrogothic kingdom at that point, because there was no power in all of Central Europe at this point that I think looked at Rome and didn't think this is appealing. Everyone thought Rome was worth having. If not for the papacy, then for its legacy, for its identity. You want to be the patrician of Rome, no matter where you're coming from. I think that even the tribes that we see become significant over the next couple of centuries would have had that same idea that this is something worth taking. Yeah. So the Lombards could have taken it and they could have held it. It would have been difficult to hold, but then they would have faced enough outside threats that it would have crumbled and fallen.
Yeah, and easily some faction in Rome. Rome at this point of time was a much diminished city, but it was a huge city for Western Europe. It was 40,000 people, 50,000 in a world where the cities, rarely went beyond 5,000. And this is a completely different beast from all the other cities of of Italy and the Western Europe. So hard to maintain, and there probably would have been a faction that inside Rome would have anyway in some shape or form appealed to some of those external powers you're talking about, and they had interest in holding Rome, and the Lombards were not particularly strong. So even with Rome and all the south, it would still not have been a particularly strong kingdom.
Let's not forget that the Saracens were a constant threat for everybody at this point as well.
Yeah, that's another possibility, right? That's a completely realistic possibility too.
You could argue that if the Lombards held it and were diminished, and because they were fighting amongst themselves fairly often as well, that if they could not hold Rome, the Saracens would have, which is quite an alternative history.
Yeah, and
no spoiler here, but the ninth century is really defined by the even with the Carolingian powers in northern Italy, we have an introduction of a lot of forces into the Italian peninsula. It today is almost forgotten, but the fact that we had armies, Saracen armies in Campania, Bari had an emir for a fairly long time. So
Yes.
all that is, and Rome was, St. Peter Cathedral was sacked. So we have already in our timeline that happened. That didn't go that far from happening. Yeah. So the defining moment of course of the entire period, we already referenced to it, is the coronation of Charlemagne. I mean,
Yes.
famously Einard said that if Charlemagne would have known what was going to happen there, he would have not entered the church, he says. Okay.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, what really happened there, or what possibilities there are, and who won the propaganda war, to define what happened there?
Oh, it's a hard question, but I will say I don't agree that Charlemagne could have regretted it, because I think that the notion of kingship that existed in Francia before Pepin and before Charlemagne would not have abided Charlemagne's justifications and Charlemagne's ambitions for being a king. We know that the association with Rome and the moral legitimacy that Charlemagne gets out of this coronation, out of this relationship, is what gives him the legitimacy to do what he does, to then go and form an empire. Do I think that means that the church won the propaganda war? No, not really, because we do see, unfortunately, even though this period grants the popes a lot of power that they then take and they do try to roll with, and they do build some significant authority and a greater expanse than they've ever had before, we unfortunately do see through this period that it does become significantly reliant on that Carolingian acceptance as well.
Yeah.
We don't just have the Pope saying, well, I can morally legitimize you, so you owe everything to me. We see the popes becoming more and more reliant on that need for protection, especially now that they have a territory to protect and defend, and there are outside influences who want to come and take that they must concede and concede and concede to the Carolingians a little bit. For quite a while, anyways. It starts to fall apart for both sides at the end. But I think that there's this balance between the two that really, they rely on each other. And without each other, neither would have had the ability to be strong enough to participate in the propaganda battle.
And literally, I only thought about this now, but you're right to say that they both falter together. So this is very interesting. Towards the night, you may think that if one didn't need the other, in a way, if one falters, then the other will grow stronger. Like, for example, the Carolingian starts faltering, towards the end of the 9th century, but the papacy goes down with them in a certain way.
Well, and that, very much that dynamic, right? As the Carolingians start to fracture, the popes are able to pull themselves back from some of the influence or the interfering of the Carolingians, but then that puts them at the mercy
of the nobles,
the nobles in Rome. So they do very much fall apart together, and without having the strong pope to say, this is the next successor of Louis II and Lothair and all of them, without the pope having a strong stance and being able to back that candidate with the full moral and spiritual authority, they fight and fracture and go out with a whimper.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. It's very interesting how this spring of the Carolingian New Europe then, just falters, and in a period which is indeed the Saeculum Obscurum, not only for the church, but also for the empire. They will both come out eventually in the 10th century for the empire, the 11th for the church, let's say.
Yes.
Let's put it this way. First,
Certainly.
the empire. In fact, the Ottonian papacy, you clearly see who's boss there, right? The boss is the emperor at that time.
Certainly.
Now, talking about, we were saying at the beginning, it's hard to picture things, right? What about the fabric of Rome? So how does it change? Because we have a Rome of the, at the beginning of this period, which almost looks Greek. If you go to
Yes.
Santa Maria Antiqua, you see, and this is incredible that in the city that gave birth to Latin, then you have so many inscriptions in Greek. And I remember very clearly how there was this English bishop that came to Rome, and everybody else was talking in Greek during a council. So and this is of course in the previous period, in the Byzantine papacy. So we got from this period, we got to a very different Rome. So do you want to explain, and also who does a lot of the work? Because I know you want to say, which pope, because we didn't mention him yet.
No, not yet.
But let's say, what changes in the fabric of Rome?
Well, I think the one thing to consider not only is that Rome at this point was looking very Greek, but because of the desertion of the Byzantines, Rome is also looking incredibly derelict. The city is falling apart. We have had multiple earthquakes, and during this period, we will continue to see Rome being hit by earthquakes and famine and things that ravage the city. So these things that stood as Greek monuments or remnants of the Byzantine papacy are falling apart. They are broken and they are in need of repair. And it is the Frankish papacy that gives us that repair. So with the refreshing, we see a whole new identity. And the first person who starts this process is not the one we will talk about in detail, but it is Leo III, because
Yes.
Leo is given a tremendous amount of wealth from Charlemagne, that they are constantly... Sorry, I just got distracted for a minute because it looked like my recording canceled,
No.
but it is still working. So,
It's still working.
So with Leo, he is being given money by Charlemagne to glorify the church, to build upon this. Okay, you now have a territory. Make it grand, make it beautiful, make it represent the power and the authority that we are basing both of our legitimacy and power upon. So he takes that and he starts to rebuild the city and rebuild the churches. And the person who comes and follows that through in a dramatic way is Pope Paschal I, who decides that in order for this all to be true, Rome must represent the heart of the church. So this needs to be a site where people come into the city and they see the church and the Pope as omnipresent, as impactful, as wealthy, as powerful, and that represents the glory of being the successor of Peter. And so he does this through a number of ways. First, by restoring major basilicas, but in a very contemporary way. So we see him with Santa Prassede and these major sites, redoing them with art where he is contemporarily featured, or that members of his family are featured to be like, this is what Rome is now. This is new. This is beautiful. This is glowing. And then he starts the massive effort of translating the relics of the saints within the city. So all of these features, all of these people who are the heart and legacy and mystique of the church are brought into his purview. It's like, this is where they belong. They belong in the heart of the church. So he makes everything represent those saints as well, because they are significant in why Rome is supposed to be such a magical, spiritual, holy place. So we do kind of see a hearkening back away from the Greek and back to this idea of the Roman saints, of the Latin saints, but bringing it into a way that is also modern and glittering and gold and substantial, to make Rome this city that people want to visit, that becomes a major tourist hotspot for holy reasons, and that changes the fabric and the appearance of the city into something grand, which we have not seen for, well, since the 400s.
Yeah, it's a big change, and pieces of Pascal's Rome are still visible today.
Yes.
Which is also amazing, because usually churches that were built in the Carolingian times, they haven't reached us not because they fell into disrepair, but usually because they were substituted then in the High Middle Ages by something even grander. But these are beautiful buildings that survives today, like Santa Prassede, for example, near Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, if you want one address to go. And
look for the square halos.
Square halo, which means that he's alive, right?
Yes.
It's very beautiful, very beautiful. So we already talked a bit about the relationship with the Franks. And of course, we talked about Charlemagne. How does it then evolve? I mean, we had a few references to it, but it's important to understand, because it keeps changing throughout the 9th century, basically, the relationship between the Franks and the papacy.
Yes, and I think that you can sort of follow the structure of this between what we can call an alliance between Adrian and Charlemagne, particularly, seeing each other as equals, and you could include Leo in that as well. Then it moves to this idea of suzerainty, right? We have the Carolingians become sort of the overlord of the support. We start to see words like fealty involved in these, and this,
and they have to have they swear an oath, no? Like they have to swear an oath to the Carolingian ruler.
Yes. And we see this play out in several documents that we can actually follow as well, because we start with alliance and everything is like, I do this for you, you do this for me, we are equals, you protect me, I legitimize you. Then we get the Pactum Ludovicanum, which is essentially the first attempt of the papacy to be like, well, we don't want your involvement. And that guarantees the non-involvement of the Franks unless they are asked to intervene. That does not last very long. And then we have the suzerainty, where we have the Constitutio Romanum, which is where the papacy needs the help and becomes sort of subject to this. This is where we get the oath of fealty. The Constitutio protects the papacy from the nobles of Rome, but it also concedes that there must be an oath of fealty from the Pope given to the emperor, and that the emperor gets to confirm the selection for Pope, which is a massive undermining of this authority, right? It's like, oh, I crown you, but now you get to decide who holds that role to crown you. It starts to fall apart there. But as we see the fracture upon fracture upon fracture of the Carolingians, as they start to fall apart, then again we see the popes going, okay, well, we have already conceded that we need you to confirm our choices, but you are no longer doing that in a timely manner, and Rome is suffering as a result of waiting for your influence. So as they start to fracture, Rome starts to pull away, and we see Pope Adrian II issuing decrees where we no longer require imperial confirmation, consecration without confirmation as it goes. And that turns into, well, you guys can no longer decide who's going to be emperor. So if your emperor dies without an heir, we're going to make the next emperor a Duke of Italy instead. And then everything falls apart
Yeah,
for
basically.
everyone.
For everyone. I have the feeling that if the Carolingians would have remained, if the empire would have continued beyond the 9th century, they had the papacy boxed in a bit. But in a way, it didn't work well for the papacy in the short term. But at the end, the fact that the Carolingian Empire fell apart did help eventually, because there were some precedents that were being written in the early 9th century about needing confirmation, which really reminds you of the Byzantine papacy. And if the power of the emperors would have stayed strong and relevant, all the way to Otto, let's say, that period, then probably the papacy would have had a harder time, re-establishing itself as the power that will be in the 11th century.
Well, and considering how difficult of a journey they will have, you could almost argue that the papacy would have ceased to be independent at all, and it would have always remained an imperial
bishopric.
Yeah.
Like Cologne, like Cologne, a very important bishopric, obviously, but not the papacy as we know it. So it's very interesting in a way how these ebbs and flows, in a way, create then that Catholic power from the 11th century onwards. But we have hinted at the saeculum obscurum, which sounds very good in Italian because
yes, it does.
because the Latin is close enough to Italian that we immediately understand what it means. So it's really cool. But we have hinted also why it falls. But I wanted to have your opinion. What happens to the church? Besides the Cadaver Synod, what are the reasons that the papacy, after basically you said every period of the papacy up to this point gave something to the papacy, gave some new powers, new understanding of its role, and then is the saeculum obscurum would be the first period of church history where we have a minus.
Yes.
A big minus.
In everything.
In everything. In secular power, in religious power, moral authority, in everything. So why that happens, in your opinion?
Well, I think it very much reflects exactly why the Carolingian and the Frankish papacy happened in the first place. It's a cycle. We come back to the same thing. The Carolingians essentially become who the Byzantines were to the papacy, which is, we need your help. We need your help. We need your help. And you are not giving us help anymore. And in that, the papacy becomes vulnerable. And as soon as the papacy becomes vulnerable, all of the nobles in Rome who have resented their inability to interfere, their inability to control, go, this is our moment. This is a weak moment. No one is coming to save the papacy this time. This is our moment. And we have several families within this period who look at that as very, very appealing, and they seize their opportunity. And not only do they seize their opportunity, but then they are fighting amongst one another. And as they are fighting amongst one another, again, the papacy is undefended from the inside, from the outside. And so we are losing security and stability at every step, and it becomes a plaything. This structure of power, which was immense and as significant as it had been at that point, is completely gone through the machinations of those who see it as a wealth generator, as an influence generator, and they hold on to it, and then they go to war with each other, and the prestige falls and falls. And because it is so important for them to keep control, we start adding things to the papacy like hereditary papacies and keeping it within the family line. So this is no longer something where someone is chosen by God or chosen by the clerics to represent God. There's no choice. There's no,
Yeah,
not even the modicum of an election here.
there's
We're
not even a
talking about
modicum. It's just like the current ruler of Rome basically saying the Pope will be this one, and it's the guy that is best suited to say yes to me, basically.
Correct. And that includes children.
Yeah,
They start
exactly.
placing children on the throne, and no one is looking at this and going, this is a legitimate thing anymore. So through this, the lack of having someone to call to defend them, it all falls apart very quickly.
Yeah. And it's interesting that didn't happen up to this point. So many people may think like, okay, this is something associated to the Middle Ages in general. But the figure that we have as popes up to the Saeculum Obscurum, I mean, there are good popes, bad popes, but in general, they keep the image of the papacy as a religious authority, as something to, and they always, most of the times, they try to do their best to represent that ideal of the papacy. But here they're not even trying for an entire century. Basically, they're not, some very little, but let's say they're not even trying, and this is absolutely new.
Yes. It never had a chance before. Well, we should say it's new in having the full authority to run all over this. There were nobles in Rome who tried this during the Frankish papacy, but there was always the emperor to call on until there wasn't. And that's when it becomes this new free-for-all.
Yeah. And this is really interesting. It's a very interesting and very, and I will say not very well known period of history. I can't wait to cover that as well. So there we go. We have the Frankish papacy, a preview of the Saeculum Obscurum, and we even did a preview of the Reform time. Thank you so much, Bri. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Please, if you haven't done it yet, I say it again, go listen to Pontifacts. It's great. One episode for each pope. So unlike with me, where you get 3, 4, 5 episodes, with two, you get one episode on each papacy, no matter the importance. So now they're very long episodes, but you get one episode for everyone. So it's very good.
It keeps us moving.
Yes, go done. Next, exactly. No, but and very detailed work. I really appreciate. Okay, thank you so much to all our listeners. I hope you liked it, and we will see each other for another episode of Storytelling Extra next month. Thank you, Bri, and see you next time.
Grazie, ciao.
Ciao.